A stubborn farmer was maintaining his grandfather's tiny farm airstrip while facing financial ruin when a massive C-17 military aircraft attempted an impossible landing during a storm. Military brass suddenly swarmed his property. By morning, everything would change. Hi everyone, welcome to Life Tales. Let's get started. Tom Whitman climbed onto his ancient tractor just as the first hint of dawn colored the Kentucky sky. At 62, his body complained with each movement, but the farm wouldn't work itself. He glanced toward the eastern field where his grandfather's landing strip cut a straight path through his struggling soybean crop. Waste of good farmland, his neighbor Harlan had told him last week. Corporate farms don't keep private airstrips. That's why they're buying everyone out while you're facing foreclosure. Tom ignored the memory and started the tractor. The small dirt runway hadn't turned a profit in decades, but 3 generations of Whitmans had maintained it. His grandfather had built it during World War II for civil air patrol duties. His father had kept it going through the Cold War. Now it fell to Tom even as bank notices piled up on his kitchen table. Every month, more local farms surrendered to Heartland Agricultural Industries. The massive corporation had already swallowed the Miller Place and the Johnson farm next door. They'd offered to buy Tom out too, but the deal required demolishing the airstrip to maximize planting area. Some things matter more than money, Tom muttered to his border collie, Rusty, who rode beside him on the tractor. The dog's gray muzzle suggested he understood the weight of tradition too. Tom's phone buzzed. The screen showed Rick Matthews, manager of the regional airport 30 miles north. Morning, Rick. Tom, got a severe weather system heading your way tonight. Might want to secure anything that could blow around. Thanks for the heads up. Strip's clear if anyone needs emergency landing. Rick chuckled. Always the same answer. You know, most pilots don't even know your runway exists anymore. It's not on modern charts. Grandfather always said being prepared matters most when it's least expected. Well, this storm looks nasty. Just be careful. Tom spent the day checking the property, paying special attention to the runway. He cleared a fallen branch and filled a small hole forming near the eastern end. The strip wasn't much, just 3,200 feet of packed earth and gravel, but he kept it in perfect condition despite having no visitors for months. As evening approached, the western sky darkened ominously. Tom secured the last of his equipment and headed inside as rain began to fall. Rusty whined at the increasing thunder. Just another storm, Tom reassured the dog, though something about this one felt different. The house creaked and groaned as wind lashed against it. He was making dinner when his landline rang. Few people called the number anymore. Whitman Farm. Mr. Whitman. A crisp, authoritative voice answered. This is Colonel Stephen Carter with the Air National Guard. Do you maintain a private airstrip on your property? Tom's hand tightened on the receiver. Yes, sir. Been here since 1943. What's its current condition and length? About 3,200 feet of packed earth and gravel. Well maintained, but getting heavy rain right now. Why? Someone need to set down. The colonel paused. We have a situation developing. A C-17 Globemaster is carrying emergency medical equipment needed at Lexington Memorial. Both primary and alternate airports are weathered in. Tom nearly dropped the phone. A C-17? Colonel, that's impossible. Those need runways twice my length, and concrete, not dirt. I understand your concern, but the aircraft commander specifically requested your coordinates when advised of the situation. Who's the pilot? Tom asked, suddenly alert. Captain Josh Reynolds. The name hit Tom like a physical blow. Josh Reynolds, the skinny kid who used to bike 10 miles to watch planes land at Tom's strip. The boy Tom had taught to fly in his old Cessna, who'd later joined the Air Force with Tom's recommendation letter in hand. Josh knows this isn't possible, Tom said. My strip can't handle a military transport. That's suicide in these conditions. Captain Reynolds seems to think otherwise, sir. He specifically said Tom Whitman's strip will work. I learned to fly there. Tom stared out the window at the rain hammering his fields. What Josh was proposing wasn't just risky, it was practically a death wish. If he crashes on my land, people will die, Tom said bluntly. If those medical supplies don't reach Lexington by morning, more people will die, the colonel replied. The decision is Captain Reynolds's, but he needs your help. Can you light the runway? Tom closed his eyes. 20 years since he'd seen Josh. 20 years since he'd promised the boy's dying mother he'd make sure her son had a future. I'll light it, Tom said finally. But you tell Josh that if he destroys my grandfather's runway, I'll never forgive him. The weather had worsened by the time Tom pulled on his rain gear. The wind nearly knocked him down as he hauled emergency runway lights from his barn, LED markers he kept for the occasional night landing. Never had he imagined using them for a massive transport plane. Rusty watched anxiously from the porch as Tom placed lights along the runway edges, driving stakes into the increasingly muddy ground. His truck headlights provided additional illumination while he worked. By the time he finished, he was soaked through despite his rain gear. Back in his truck, Tom radioed the frequency the colonel had given him. Whitman Farm to incoming C-17. Runway is marked and as clear as possible. Surface is wet but holding. Wind gusting from southwest at about 25 knots. For several seconds, there was only static. Then, copy that, Whitman Farm. This is Ghost Rider 425, beginning approach. ETA 5 minutes. The voice had deepened with age, but was unmistakably Josh's. Tom hadn't realized how much he'd missed that voice until he heard it again. Tom positioned his truck at the northwest end of the strip, headlights adding to the illumination. The rain had slackened slightly, but wind still gusted unpredictably. He stepped out, straining to see through the darkness. Then he heard it. The deep, distinctive roar of 4 massive engines, much louder than anything his strip had hosted in decades. Suddenly, landing lights pierced the low clouds, illuminating raindrops in bright cones. The massive shape of the C-17 emerged, looking impossibly large against the night sky. "Too fast," Tom whispered. "He's coming in way too fast." The C-17 was indeed approaching at a speed that seemed suicidal for the short runway ahead. But as Tom watched, the huge aircraft pitched up slightly, its massive flaps fully extended, bleeding speed at a rate that defied conventional wisdom. The back wheels touched down precisely at the threshold Tom had marked, throwing up sheets of water. The reverse thrusters engaged with a deafening roar, the aircraft fighting against its own momentum. Tom couldn't breathe as the massive plane hurtled down his grandfather's runway, eating up the distance at an alarming rate. 3/4 of the way down, the nose wheel finally touched and the aircraft continued its controlled deceleration. For a terrible moment, Tom thought it wouldn't stop in time. The end of the strip was approaching fast, beyond which lay a drainage ditch and then his soybean fields. But with just over 200 feet remaining, the C-17 slowed to a crawl and came to a complete stop. Tom stood frozen in the rain, unable to process what he had just witnessed. It should have been impossible. No pilot should have been able to put a fully loaded C-17 down on a 3,200-foot dirt strip in these conditions. His radio crackled. "Whitman Farm, Ghost Rider 425 is down safely. Thanks for the assist, Tom." A pause, then more personally. "Still keeping this old strip in good shape, I see." Tom found his voice. "You almost gave me a heart attack, Josh. That was the craziest damn thing I've ever seen." A light chuckle came through the radio. "Learned from the best, didn't I?" Tom drove down to where the massive aircraft sat, its sheer size making his truck look like a toy in comparison. The rear loading ramp was already lowering, and figures in Air Force uniforms emerged, moving with purpose despite the rain. A tall man in a flight suit approached as Tom parked. Despite 20 years, Tom recognized him immediately, the skinny teenager now replaced by a broad-shouldered Air Force captain with short-cropped hair and confidence in his stride. "Tom Whitman," Josh said, extending his hand with a wide smile. "Bet you never thought you'd see a C-17 on your runway." Tom shook his hand firmly. "Bet you never thought you'd be crazy enough to put one down here." "You're looking good, Josh." "You too, sir." Josh glanced back at the aircraft. "We need to offload quickly. Those supplies are needed urgently in Lexington." "What do you need from me?" "Space in your barn to stage the equipment until the transport trucks arrive, and maybe some of that terrible coffee you used to make." Despite everything, Tom smiled. "Coffee hasn't improved any." For the next hour, Tom helped the Air Force crew move specialized medical equipment from the aircraft to his barn. He learned they were transporting emergency ECMO machines, advanced life support equipment needed for critical patients at the university hospital. "How long will you be grounded?" Tom asked as they worked. "Until this weather breaks," Josh replied. "And until I figure out how to get a fully loaded C-17 off a 3,200-foot dirt strip." Getting down was the easy part. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Easy?" Josh grinned. "Well, easier than getting back up will be." By midnight, they had everything transferred to the barn, tarped and ready for the transport trucks that would arrive at dawn. The storm had finally begun to ease, though rain still fell steadily. In Tom's small kitchen, Air Force personnel crowded around the table, grateful for hot coffee and shelter. Tom and Josh sat in a corner, catching up on 20 years of life. "So," Tom said quietly, "AC-17 pilot. Your mom would be proud." Josh's expression softened. "I think about her every time I fly, and about you and what you did for us after she got sick. Anyone would have helped." "No," Josh said firmly. "Not anyone would have given flying lessons to a 16-year-old with no money. Not anyone would have written a recommendation to the academy for a kid from nowhere." Tom shrugged. "You had talent. Best natural pilot I ever saw." Josh looked around the kitchen with its dated appliances and worn countertops. "The farm looks smaller than I remember." "That's because it is smaller," Tom admitted. "Had to sell the east section last year. Corporate outfits been buying up everything in the county." "Heartland Agricultural?" Tom nodded. "You've heard of them? They've been buying farmland all over the state." Josh studied Tom's face. "How bad is it?" Tom sighed. "Got about 6 months before the bank takes the rest. Can't compete with their operation, their equipment. Times change. But not this landing strip," Josh noted. "You've kept that perfect." "Grandfather would haunt me if I let it go," Tom said with a small smile. "Besides, pilots still need it sometimes." As dawn approached, the storm finally cleared. Josh stepped onto the porch, studying the sky. "Weather's breaking," he observed. "Transport trucks should be here soon." Tom nodded. "What about your takeoff? Strip's going to be softer after all that rain." Josh's expression turned serious. "That's what I need to discuss with you. We've run the calculations. Even unloaded, it's going to be tight. We'll need every inch of your runway, and we'll need to reduce weight as much as possible." "Meaning?" "Minimal fuel load, just enough to reach Louisville." He hesitated. "And we may need to extend the runway a bit." Tom frowned. "Extend it? How?" "The drainage ditch is right at the end. If we could flatten some of your field beyond the drainage ditch, it would give us a safety margin." Tom stared at him. "You're talking about plowing under my soybean crop." "Just about an acre," Josh said quietly. "I know it's a lot to ask. The Air Force will compensate you fully." Before Tom could respond, a rumble of engines announced the arrival of the transport trucks from Lexington. The medical equipment was quickly transferred and the trucks departed. Soon after, a staff car arrived and Colonel Carter stepped out. He approached Tom with formal military bearing. "Mr. Whitman, on behalf of the United States Air Force, I want to thank you for your assistance last night. Your actions directly contributed to saving lives." Tom nodded awkwardly. "Just doing what needed doing." Josh joined them. "Sir, we've completed weight reduction and are preparing for departure. The runway situation is challenging." Colonel Carter looked at the massive C-17 sitting at the end of Tom's modest landing strip, an incongruous sight against the backdrop of Kentucky farmland. "Captain Reynolds assures me he can get that aircraft off your property safely," the colonel told Tom. "However, there is the matter of collateral impact." "How much of my field would you need to clear?" Tom asked. "Approximately 1 acre," Josh replied. "We'd need to fill in part of the drainage ditch and level the ground beyond it for safety." Tom looked out at his fields, at the soybeans he'd planted just weeks earlier. In good years, that acre might yield enough to cover a mortgage payment, but the fact remained, he was going to lose this farm anyway. "Do what you need to do," he said finally. Within an hour, Air Force ground personnel had arrived with equipment. Tom watched as they efficiently filled part of the drainage ditch and flattened the section of field beyond it, creating a makeshift extension to his grandfather's runway. Word had spread through the local community. Vehicles lined the rural road alongside Tom's property, people standing beside them with phones raised to record the unprecedented event. Tom recognized many faces, neighbors who'd watched his financial struggles, local pilots who'd used his strip over the years, even the banker who held his mortgage. Josh completed his final checks and climbed aboard. The crew sealed the aircraft, and the massive engines began to spool up, their roar drowning out all other sounds across the farm. Tom stood at a safe distance with Colonel Carter, watching as the C-17 taxied into position, using every available inch of the runway for its takeoff roll. "He's really going to do this," Tom murmured. "Captain Reynolds specifically requested this mission when he heard about the emergency," the colonel said unexpectedly. "Said something about repaying an old debt." Before Tom could respond, the C-17's engines thundered to full power. The massive aircraft began to move slowly at first, but with rapidly increasing speed. The dirt strip, still damp from the night's rain, held firm under the punishing weight. Halfway down the runway, the aircraft was moving faster, but not yet at takeoff speed. 3/4 of the way, still on the ground. "Come on, Josh," Tom whispered. "Get it up." The end of the original runway approached. The C-17 hit the newly flattened section, still accelerating. For a terrible moment, Tom thought it wouldn't be enough. Then, just as the aircraft reached the very end of the extended runway, the nose lifted. The main wheels followed, and the massive C-17 clawed its way into the sky with what seemed like inches to spare. A cheer went up from the onlookers as the aircraft climbed steadily, banking gently toward Louisville. Tom released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Remarkable flying," Colonel Carter said quietly. As the crowd began to disperse, many of them approached Tom, clapping him on the back, shaking his hand. "Never thought I'd see something like that in my lifetime," said Dale Simmons, who owned the farm supply store. "Your grandfather would be proud, Tom." Even Paul Benson from the bank approached. "That was something else, Tom. Something else entirely." 3 days later, Tom was fixing a fence when he heard vehicles approaching. Looking up, he saw 3 government SUVs pulling into his driveway. Rusty barked a warning from the porch. "Easy, boy," Tom called, setting down his tools. A man in an Air Force uniform stepped out of the lead vehicle. His shoulders carried the stars of a general. "Mr. Whitman," the man called. "I'm General Peter Langston, Air Mobility Command. Got a few minutes to talk?" Tom wiped his hands on his jeans. "Of course, General. Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." Seated at Tom's kitchen table, General Langston got straight to the point. "Mr. Whitman, I've reviewed the report about Captain Reynolds's emergency landing. Quite extraordinary. But what interests me more is your landing strip's history and location." Tom waited, unsure where this was heading. "Our analysts have identified a significant gap in our emergency landing capabilities in this region," the general continued. "Captain Reynolds's successful operation demonstrated your strip's strategic value even for our largest aircraft." "It was a near thing," Tom said. "Josh is an exceptional pilot." "Indeed. But the strip itself is what brought me here." The general leaned forward. "The Air Force would like to designate your landing strip as an official emergency landing facility. This would involve upgrading the surface, installing proper lighting, and establishing a maintenance agreement." Tom stared at him. "General, I'm afraid that won't be possible. I'm likely to lose this farm to foreclosure within months. Captain Reynolds mentioned your situation. That's the other part of my proposal." General Langston smiled. "The designation comes with a substantial facility management fee and land lease arrangement that would frankly resolve your financial concerns. Your property would remain yours, with the Air Force leasing only the runway and immediate surrounding area." Tom's mind raced. "You're serious about this?" "Completely serious. Your farm's location fills a critical gap in our safety network. The arrangement would actually prevent the property from being developed in ways that might interfere with flight operations. In other words, Tom realized, it would prevent Heartland Agricultural from ever taking over the rest of his farm." "That sounds promising." "Excellent. I'll have my staff prepare the details." The general stood. "Oh, and Mr. Whitman, Captain Reynolds speaks very highly of you. Says you're the reason he joined the Air Force. Seems you've been contributing to our capabilities for longer than you realized." 3 months later, Tom stood watching as Air Force engineers completed the surface upgrades to what was now officially designated Whitman Auxiliary Landing Facility. The dirt strip had been reinforced with a special polymer surface that maintained its rugged character while providing better support for heavy aircraft. The financial arrangement had indeed saved his farm. The foreclosure proceedings had been canceled, and Tom had even been able to buy back the eastern section he'd been forced to sell the previous year. A familiar sound drew Tom's attention to the sky, the distinctive roar of C-17 engines. Josh had promised to be the first official aircraft to use the newly designated facility. Right on schedule, the massive transport appeared, performing a perfect landing on the improved runway. As Josh descended from the aircraft, he was accompanied by General Langston. "Tom," Josh called, striding forward with a grin. "How do you like your new runway?" "Looks a lot like the old one," Tom replied with a smile. "Just sturdier." General Langston shook Tom's hand. "Your facility is exactly what we needed in this region. In fact, you've started something of a movement. We're now identifying other strategic private airfields that could be incorporated into our emergency network." "Grandfather would be pleased," Tom said. He always believed private citizens had a role to play in national readiness. As they walked back toward the house, Tom noticed a gathering of vehicles by his farmhouse. Neighbors, local pilots, and Air Force personnel had assembled for what Tom had been told would be a small ceremony to mark the facility's official opening. Paul Benson from the bank stepped forward. "Tom, on behalf of the Riverside Business Association, we wanted to present you with this." He handed Tom a plaque that read, "In recognition of the Whitman family's 7 decades of service to aviation and national security." After the ceremony, Josh pulled Tom aside. "I never properly thanked you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For believing in a skinny kid with big dreams. For showing me that some traditions are worth preserving, no matter how impractical they seem." Tom felt his throat tighten. "Your mother asked me to make sure you had opportunities. I just did what I promised her I would." "You did more than that," Josh insisted. "You showed me that loyalty matters. That keeping your word matters. That's why I was so determined to land here when they said it couldn't be done." As the sun began to set over what was now Whitman Auxiliary Landing Facility, Tom realized something profound had changed. His grandfather's landing strip hadn't just been preserved. It had found new purpose while honoring its origins. Rusty trotted up beside him, gray-muzzled but still watching over the farm. Tom scratched his ears, gazing out at the fields that would remain in Whitman hands for at least another generation. "Some landings seem impossible until someone has the courage to attempt them," General Langston observed, joining Tom as they watched the sunset paint the runway in golden light. "Some traditions seem impractical until their true value is revealed." In a world where family farms were disappearing into corporate holdings, one farmer's stubborn dedication to his grandfather's legacy had not only saved his land, it had proven that sometimes the old ways still have something vital to offer the modern world. Love the story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.